Most people measure themselves by their best days. The wise measure themselves by what they do after their worst. Good evening. I want to talk to you tonight about something every single person listening to this broadcast has experienced and will experience again. A bad day. Not a bad year, not a bad life. Just a day. One of those days where nothing quite lines up the way you intended. Where the effort you gave seemed to return nothing. Where you arrived home a little quieter, a little heavier, carrying something invisible on your shoulders that the people around you can almost sense, even if they cannot name it. We've all been there, and if we're being truthful with one another, we'll all be there again. But here is what I want you to understand tonight, and I want you to hold on to this thought, turn it over in your mind, and carry it with you long after this broadcast ends. The bad day is not the story. What you do after it is. There is a principle as old as human civilization itself, and it is simply this: every living thing responds to its environment. The flower turns toward the light. The river carves around the stone. And a human being, the most extraordinary creature on this earth, has been given something no other living thing possesses: the power to choose that response. Not react. Choose. There is an enormous difference between the two. When a bad day happens, and notice I said when, not if, the untrained mind reacts. It rehearses every frustration. It replays every failure. It sits down at the table of the evening and feeds itself on bitterness, self-doubt, and the cold leftovers of a day gone wrong. And then it wonders why tomorrow begins the same way. The trained mind does something entirely different. It acknowledges the difficulty honestly. It does not pretend the day was fine when it was not. But then, and this is the critical moment, it makes a deliberate decision. It asks a quiet, powerful question. What can I take from this? Not what happened to me, but what can I take from this? You see, nature wastes nothing. Every storm fertilizes the ground. Every winter prepares the spring. And every hard day, if you are willing to receive it honestly, carries inside it a seed of something useful, a lesson, a correction, a sharper understanding of who you are and what you are truly made of. The men and women throughout history who built something lasting, who contributed something real to this world, were not people who avoided difficulty. They were people who became skilled at absorbing it, skilled at standing back up, skilled at converting the raw material of a hard experience into the fuel of forward motion. That skill does not arrive fully formed. It is built quietly, repeatedly, in the private moments after the door closes and the world outside goes still. Now let me give you something practical, because wisdom without application is merely pleasant noise. Tonight, after a hard day, do not collapse into distraction. Do not reach for whatever numbs the feeling fastest. Instead, give yourself 10 minutes of honest reflection. Sit with a notebook if you have one. Ask yourself 3 things. What went wrong today, and was any part of it within my control? If yes, own it, fully, no excuses. That ownership is not weakness. It is the beginning of correction. What went right today, even slightly? Because something did. Even on the worst of days, something held. Find it. Name it. Because what we acknowledge, we strengthen. And finally, what one thing will I do tomorrow deliberately to move forward? Not 10 things. 1. Specific, chosen, written down if possible. That simple ritual, repeated evening after evening, becomes something remarkable over time. It becomes character. And character, as the philosophers have long understood, is simply habit made permanent. I want you to think about something for a moment. And I want you to think about it honestly, the way you would if you were sitting alone in a quiet room with no one to perform for and nothing to prove. You had a hard day. Maybe it was today. Maybe it was recently enough that you can still feel the weight of it pressing against your chest when you sit down at the end of the evening. The kind of day where things did not go the way you planned, where your efforts seemed to return nothing, where the version of yourself you showed up as, despite your intentions, fell short of the version you believed you were capable of being. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a voice began to speak, quietly at first, then louder. And what that voice said was not kind. It said, maybe this is just who you are. It said, maybe the evidence has been building for a while, and today simply confirmed what was already true. It said, perhaps you were wrong about yourself all along. I know that voice. Every honest human being knows that voice, and tonight I want to address it directly, not with flattery, not with empty encouragement, but with something far more valuable: the truth. Here is what most people do not understand about a single difficult day. They treat it as a conclusion, as if life gathered all available evidence, reviewed it carefully, deliberated at length, and then handed down a final ruling on their worth, their ability, and their future. But that is not what a bad day is. Not even close. A bad day is a data point, one singular, sitting inside a sequence of hundreds, thousands, of other data points that together form the actual picture of who you are and where you are going. A scientist does not abandon a decade of research because one experiment produced an unexpected result. A farmer does not abandon his field because one morning brought frost. A navigator does not conclude the ship is lost because the wind shifted for an afternoon. They understand something fundamental, that a single result in isolation tells you very little about the overall direction. What matters is the pattern, and the pattern is built over time, not revealed in a day. Your bad day changed nothing permanent. It adjusted nothing final. It closed no door that cannot be opened again by the simple act of returning, deliberately, purposefully, tomorrow. What it did do is hand you information. Specific, honest, useful information about where an adjustment might be needed, about where your preparation may have had a gap, about where your focus wandered or your discipline softened slightly. That information is not a punishment. It is a gift, rough around the edges perhaps, but a gift nonetheless. The moment you stop reading a hard day as a sentence and start reading it as a signal, everything changes. You stop defending yourself against the day and start learning from it. You stop asking, why did this happen to me, and start asking, what is this showing me? And that single shift in interpretation, that quiet internal pivot, is where resilience actually begins. Not in motivation, not in willpower, in perception. Change what the day means to you, and you change what it does to you. A bad day is not a verdict. It never was. It is simply a variable in a much longer equation, and you are still writing it. I want you to sit with something tonight. Something uncomfortable enough to be honest, but important enough that ignoring it any longer would cost you more than facing it directly. You are not in control of as much as you think you are. The traffic that made you late, the decision someone else made that affected your plans, the opportunity that seemed close enough to touch and then quietly disappeared, the words spoken to you that landed harder than the person who said them probably intended, the circumstances that arrived uninvited and rearranged your carefully constructed day without asking your permission. None of that was yours to control. And deep down, you already know this. You have always known it. And yet something inside you keeps reaching for that control anyway, keeps straining against the things that will not move, and arriving at the end of the day exhausted, frustrated, and somehow feeling responsible for outcomes that were never entirely in your hands to begin with. That is a heavy way to live, and tonight I want to offer you a way out of it. Now hold that thought for just a moment, because what I am about to tell you is not a suggestion to surrender. It is not an invitation to become passive or indifferent or resigned to whatever life happens to place in your path. Quite the opposite. What I am pointing you toward is something far more powerful than control over circumstances ever could be. Because the truth is, the person who spends their energy trying to control everything around them has far less power than the person who has mastered something smaller, quieter, and infinitely more significant. There is one thing, precisely one, that no circumstance, no other person, no bad day, no sudden reversal of fortune can ever take from you without your direct and conscious permission. Your response. How you interpret what happens, what meaning you assign to it, what action you decide to take in its aftermath, what posture you choose to carry into the next hour, the next conversation, the next attempt. These things live entirely inside you. They are yours completely. And they are, when you truly understand this, the most formidable tools available to any human being alive. The ancient thinkers understood this long before the modern world had language for it. They observed that two people could pass through an identical experience and emerge from it as entirely different people, one broken, one strengthened, not because the experience treated them differently, but because each chose a different response to it. The experience was the same. The outcome was not, and the only variable between them was internal. This is not a small idea. This is perhaps the most liberating idea a person can absorb into their daily life. Because the moment you genuinely accept that your response belongs to you, fully, exclusively, unconditionally, something remarkable happens. You stop waiting for conditions to improve before you decide to act with dignity. You stop requiring the day to be fair before you choose to bring your best to it. You stop handing the controls of your inner life to things and people and events that were never qualified to hold them in the first place. You take back what was always yours. And here is where that becomes practical, because wisdom without application is simply pleasant noise. The next time something goes wrong, and it will pause before you respond. Not for long a breath. A single moment of deliberate space between what happened and what you do next. In that space, ask yourself one quiet question. Who do I want to be in response to this? Not what do I feel? Not what do I deserve? Not what is fair? But who do I choose to be, right now, in this moment, with what I have been given? That question, asked consistently, builds something over time that no circumstance can construct for you and none can destroy. It builds a person who is steady, reliable, grounded, a person who others trust and who trusts themselves. You cannot govern the storm, but you can govern the sailor, and the sailor, as it turns out, is the only thing that determines whether the ship reaches shore. Your response is your power. It always has been. Use it tonight. I want you to consider something tonight that most people spend a great deal of energy trying to avoid acknowledging. You have been trying to get comfortable, not just physically, emotionally, professionally, internally. You have been quietly arranging your life, your routines, your decisions, your boundaries in a way that minimizes disruption, that reduces friction, that keeps the unexpected at a manageable distance. And on the surface, this seems entirely reasonable. Who wouldn't want a smoother road? But somewhere underneath that arrangement, something has been bothering you. A quiet dissatisfaction you cannot quite name. A sense that despite the relative calm, despite the absence of major crisis, you are not growing the way you once believed you would. That the person you imagined becoming seems somehow further away now than they did when life was harder and the path was less certain. And you wonder, privately, honestly, whether the comfort itself might be part of the problem. I want to tell you tonight that the instinct behind that wondering is correct. Before you set that thought aside, before you return to the familiar reassurance that stability is simply wisdom and rest is simply earned, stay with this just a moment longer, because what I am about to share with you does not ask you to manufacture suffering or seek out hardship for its own sake. That would be foolishness, not philosophy. What it does ask is something more precise, something more honest, and ultimately something far more useful to the life you are genuinely trying to build. Resilience, true, durable, tested resilience, cannot be developed in the absence of resistance. This is not a motivational opinion. It is a natural law. The muscle that is never challenged does not strengthen. It atrophies. The mind that is never stretched does not sharpen. It softens. The character that is never tested does not deepen. It remains exactly as it was, untried, unverified, and unknown even to the person who carries it. Difficulty is not the enemy of growth. It is the mechanism of it. Think of every person you genuinely admire, not for their possessions or their titles, but for the quality of who they are, their steadiness under pressure, their ability to absorb disappointment without being consumed by it, their capacity to continue moving forward when the circumstances give them every reasonable excuse to stop. Now ask yourself honestly, did that quality come from the easy seasons of their life, or did it come from the hard ones? You already know the answer. You have always known it. The easy seasons were enjoyed. The hard ones were transformative, and the person standing on the other side of difficulty is never quite the same as the person who entered it, because something was built inside them that simply cannot be built any other way. This is the relief that most people miss entirely when they are in the middle of a difficult stretch. They are so focused on escaping the difficulty that they fail to recognize what it is quietly constructing inside them. Every hard day you do not quit on is adding a layer, not visibly, not dramatically, but permanently. Each time you return after a setback, each time you choose to continue when stopping would have been easier and entirely understandable, you are depositing something into the deepest account you own, the account of who you actually are. And unlike most things in life, that account cannot be taken from you. It cannot be lost in a market downturn or reassigned by someone else's decision or undone by a single bad chapter. It is yours, earned through the only currency difficulty accepts, your continued, deliberate, undefeated presence. So tonight, if you are in the middle of something hard, I want you to reframe it slightly, not to minimize it, not to pretend it is easy when it is not, But to see it accurately, you are not simply enduring a difficult period. You are being built during one. The discomfort you are feeling is not a sign that something has gone wrong. In many cases, it is a sign that something is going right, that you are being stretched beyond what you previously were in preparation for what you are becoming. Ask yourself this evening one honest question. Not what would make this easier, but what is this making me? Sit with that answer. Write it down if you can, because the person being shaped in this difficult season is the very person your future is waiting for. Comfort preserves who you are. Difficulty reveals who you can become. And the world has always had far greater need for the second. Keep going tonight. I want to ask you something personal tonight. And I want you to answer it honestly, not to me, but to yourself, which is the only place honest answers ever truly matter. What do you do when the day ends badly? Not what do you tell people you do, not the composed, reasonable version you might describe in polite conversation. But what do you actually do in those quiet hours between when the difficulty ended and when the next day begins, when the energy is low and the disappointment is still fresh and the path forward feels temporarily unclear? Because most people, if they are being fully truthful, do something in those hours that they would not consciously choose if they stopped to think about it carefully. They replay. They rehearse the frustration. They recount every moment that went wrong in vivid, exhausting detail. They carry the weight of the day straight through the evening and deliver it, unprocessed and unresolved, directly into the following morning. And then they are genuinely puzzled when tomorrow begins feeling remarkably similar to today. Now stay with me here, because I am not suggesting this pattern makes you weak or undisciplined or beyond the reach of change. I am suggesting it makes you human, entirely, recognizably human. The pull toward rumination after a hard day is not a character flaw. It is a deeply ingrained tendency of a mind that has not yet been given a better alternative. A mind that is doing the only thing it knows to do with unresolved tension, turning it over and over, hoping that repetition will somehow produce resolution. It rarely does. But the mind keeps trying anyway, because no one ever handed it a more effective tool. Tonight I want to hand you that tool. Here is what the most grounded, consistently effective people throughout history have understood about the hours between one day and the next. Those hours are not dead time. They are not simply the absence of productivity. They are active preparation. And what you do inside them determines, with remarkable precision, the quality of what you bring to the morning that follows. The evening is where the next day is quietly assembled. Think about that carefully. Your mindset when you wake, your clarity when you begin, your emotional posture when the first challenge of the new day arrives. None of these appear spontaneously from nowhere. They are the direct result of how the previous evening was spent. What you consumed mentally, what you resolved emotionally, what you decided quietly about yourself and your direction before you closed your eyes. A night spent in unmanaged rumination produces a morning already carrying yesterday's unfinished weight. But a night spent in deliberate, honest reflection, however brief, produces something entirely different. It produces a morning with space in it, clarity, a sense, however modest, of readiness. That difference is not accidental. It is architectural. And you are the architect. So here is what I want you to consider building into your evenings. Not an elaborate system, not a complex regimen requiring perfect conditions, but 3 simple, consistent acts that take no more than 15 minutes and return far more than they cost. First, close the day honestly. Sit quietly for a few moments and acknowledge what happened without dramatizing it. Not to punish yourself, but to complete it. An unacknowledged day does not disappear. It lingers. Naming it even briefly gives the mind permission to release it rather than carry it forward indefinitely. Second, find one thing that held. One moment, however small, where something went right. Where you made a decent choice, showed a measure of patience, demonstrated even a fragment of the person you are working to become. Because that moment existed. It always does. And what you acknowledge before sleep, you tend to repeat after waking. Third, set one clear intention for tomorrow, not a list, not an agenda. One specific, chosen, deliberate thing you will do to move forward, written down if possible. Because a mind that closes the evening with a direction wakes with momentum, and a mind that closes with unresolved chaos wakes with resistance. These 3 acts together form something quiet but powerful. They form a bridge between the day that was difficult and the morning that does not have to be. between the person who was knocked slightly sideways today and the person who returns tomorrow with something the difficulty gave them. The evening ritual is not self-care in the soft, decorative sense. It is maintenance of the most important instrument you own, your mind. And like any precision instrument, it performs best when it is tended to consistently, not left to manage itself in the dark. Tonight, before you sleep, close the day properly. Acknowledge it. Find what held. Choose your direction. Do that tonight, and again tomorrow evening, and the evening after that, because the morning you have been waiting for is not somewhere out ahead in the distant future. It is being assembled right now in these quiet hours by the choices you make before the lights go out. Shape it deliberately. I want you to think about something tonight that most people prefer to leave unexamined, not because it is complicated, but because it is uncomfortably revealing. You have a version of yourself that you present when things are going well, when the results are arriving, when the people around you are pleased, when the effort you are putting in is visibly producing the outcomes you intended. In those seasons, you are patient, generous, focused, steady. You make good decisions. You treat people well. You feel in those moments like the person you always believed you had the potential to become. And then a hard stretch arrives, a setback, a failure, a season where nothing seems to respond to your effort the way it should. And quietly, without announcement, a different version of you begins to appear. Shorter in patience, quicker to doubt, less generous with others and far harsher with yourself. The composure that seemed so natural in the good season becomes surprisingly difficult to locate in the hard one. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a deeply unsettling question begins to form. Which version is the real one? I want you to pause before you answer that, because the answer most people reach in that moment is the wrong one, and accepting it prematurely costs them something they cannot easily recover. Most people, when they observe the gap between who they are in easy times and who they become under pressure, conclude that the pressured version is the true one. That the composed, capable, generous version was performance, and the struggling version is the authentic self finally surfacing. This conclusion feels honest. It has the texture of self-awareness. But it is, in fact, one of the most quietly destructive misunderstandings a person can carry about themselves, and tonight I want to correct it. Character is not revealed by difficulty. It is built by it. There is an important difference between those two things, and understanding that difference changes everything. When a hard season exposes impatience, self-doubt, or inconsistency, it is not confirming that these things are your permanent nature. It is identifying the specific places where your character is still under construction, where the work of becoming is not yet finished, where the next layer needs to be added. A building under construction is not a failed building. It is an unfinished one. And the scaffolding, the visible gaps, the rough edges, the areas not yet complete, is not evidence of inadequacy. It is evidence of a process actively underway. The easy seasons of life do not build character because they do not require it. They require execution of what already exists. But the hard seasons, the ones that push against every comfortable assumption you have made about yourself, those seasons are doing something far more significant. They are demanding that you develop qualities you do not yet fully possess. And development, by its very nature, is uncomfortable. It is supposed to be. Think of every quality you genuinely admire in another human being. Patience under pressure, integrity when it is costly, kindness when it is unreciprocated, persistence when the results are not arriving, composure when the circumstances are anything but composed. Now ask yourself honestly, where do you suppose those qualities came from? They did not arrive with the person at birth, fully formed and permanently installed. They were constructed, quietly, repeatedly, in the specific moments when the easier alternative was to respond without them. Every time that person chose patience when impatience was available, the capacity for patience deepened slightly. Every time they chose integrity when compromise would have gone unnoticed, that integrity became more structurally sound. The quality was built in the moment it was most difficult to demonstrate, not before, not after. In that precise, demanding moment of choice, that is how character is actually made. Not declared, not inherited. Made through repeated, deliberate decisions in the presence of genuine difficulty. And here is where this becomes not just philosophical, but immediately, practically useful to you tonight. The hard stretch you are currently in, or the one still fresh enough in your memory to feel real, is not interrupting your development. It is your development. The very friction you are experiencing is the resistance required to build what the easy seasons could never build in you. Every time you return to your values when the day has given you every reason to abandon them, you add a layer. Every time you choose your best response when your worst would have been entirely understandable, something permanent is deposited into the foundation of who you are. And those deposits accumulate, quietly, without ceremony, without immediate visible reward, but with absolute reliability over time. The person who has moved through difficulty with dignity, not perfectly, not without struggle, but without surrendering their core commitments, that person possesses something that cannot be purchased, borrowed, or imitated. They possess a proven self, a self that has been tested and did not completely collapse, a self they can trust. That trust, once earned through experience, becomes the most stabilizing force available to a human life. So tonight, I want you to reframe the difficulty you are carrying or have recently carried one final time. It is not evidence against you. It is raw material for you. The very hardness of it is what makes it useful. And the person being shaped inside it, the one choosing, however imperfectly, to return to their values when returning is not easy, that person is not falling behind. That person is being built. Character is not what you perform when life applauds you. It is what remains standing functional and quietly undefeated when it does not. What remains in you is more than you think. Here is the central truth I want to leave with you tonight. It is not the day that falls that defines you. It is the decision you make in the quiet after it. Read that again. Let it settle. Every great life you have ever admired was built not in the bright moments of triumph, but in the dark, unwitnessed moments of choice, when no one was watching, when the cameras were off, when the crowd had gone home. In those moments, ordinary people chose to rise rather than remain. And in doing so, over time, they became extraordinary. That choice is available to you, tonight. Here is what I want you to do right now. Not someday, not when things improve, not when you feel more prepared or more rested or more certain. Tonight. Close this broadcast and spend 10 minutes in honest silence. Review the day without judgment, but also without excuse. Take what is useful. Release what is not. Choose one deliberate action for tomorrow. Write it down, and then rest not in defeat, but in preparation, because tomorrow is not a continuation of today's failure. Tomorrow is a new field, and you get to decide what you plant in it. The choice has always been yours. It still is. This is Earl Nightingale reminding you, a bad day is not a wall. It is a door. Open it. Good night and good thinking.